Most people misunderstand avoidance. They think distance means disinterest, silence means lack of love, and space means emotional detachment. But that's not always true. Because when someone with an avoidant attachment style truly loves you, they don't suddenly become perfect at expressing it. They become consistent in their own quiet, uncomfortable way. And here's the truth most people miss. Real love from an avoidant is not loud, it's not dramatic, and it's not constant reassurance. It is subtle, but deeply intentional. And if you know what to look for, you'll see the clearest proof that they actually care more than they can say. When people talk about someone who is emotionally distant, they often assume the simplest explanation. If they leave, they don't care if they stay away. They've moved on if they need space. They are done with the relationship. But with an avoidant attachment style, that assumption can be deeply misleading. Because for an avoidant, distance is not always a sign of absence of love. It is often a way of managing the intensity of emotions they don't yet know how to hold. So when an avoidant comes back, it is not just a casual return. It is not the same as someone who forgot you and suddenly remembered you. It is not random. It is not empty. It is a moment where internal conflict quietly wins over emotional withdrawal. On one side, there is their instinct to protect themselves, to maintain control, to stay safe in emotional distance. On the other side, there is something they cannot fully silence. You are present in their mind. Your impact on their emotional system, the connection they have not been able to completely erase. And this is where the truth becomes important. An avoidant who does not care will not struggle. They will not return. They will not hesitate. They will not revisit a connection that no longer serves them. The distance becomes permanent, clean, and final. But an avoidant who genuinely feels something deeper cannot maintain that clean separation. Even when they try, something pulls them back, not always in a dramatic or obvious way, but in small, quiet internal shifts that eventually lead them to reappear. When they come back, it is rarely loud or emotional. There are no grand confessions or dramatic apologies in most cases. Instead, it might be a simple message, a check-in, a casual conversation that seems ordinary on the surface. But underneath that simplicity is something more meaningful, the effort to reconnect despite discomfort. Because for them, reaching out is not easy. It often goes against their instinct to stay emotionally protected. It requires them to step outside their comfort zone, even if only slightly. What most people misunderstand is that avoidants do not experience connection in a linear way. They can care deeply and still withdraw. They can miss someone and still avoid them. They can think about a person constantly and still choose silence. So when they come back, it is not because all confusion has disappeared. It is because their emotional distance has softened enough for action to happen. That small shift matters more than it appears. The return also reveals something else, internal resistance. An avoidant does not come back without hesitation. There is often a battle between logic and emotion. Logic says, stay away, it is safer. Emotion says this connection still matters. And when they return, it is because emotion has not been fully shut down. It has survived their attempts at suppression. It has stayed alive despite their coping mechanisms. But here is where patience and understanding become important. Their return does not always mean immediate change. It does not mean they are suddenly ready for full emotional availability. It does not mean all distance disappears. Instead, it often marks the beginning of internal processing. They are testing emotional safety again. They are seeing if connection still feels overwhelming, or if it can, tolerated in smaller manageable doses. This is also why their return can feel confusing to others. People who expect consistency might interpret their pattern as mixed signals, but in reality, it is often a reflection of emotional conditioning rather than lack of interest. Avoidants tend to regulate closeness and distance like a pendulum. When closeness feels too intense, they swing away. When distance becomes too silent, something inside pulls them back. And yet, through all of this movement, one truth remains consistent. They would not return to what holds no meaning. Avoidants are not typically drawn back to emotional connections that feel empty to them. If they re-engage, even minimally, it usually means the connection has left a mark on them that they cannot fully ignore. The most important thing to understand is that their return is not about perfection, it is about presence. It is about the fact that despite their fear, despite their instinct to withdraw, they still find a way back into your orbit. And that alone speaks volumes about what you represent in their emotional world. So instead of measuring their love by how loudly they express it, or how consistently they stay, they measure their love by how much they care. It becomes more accurate to observe something quieter, but more revealing. Do they come back, even when it would be easier not to? Because for an avoidant, returning is not just an action. It is a conflict resolved, even if only temporarily, in favor of connection over distance. For someone, with an avoidant attachment style, emotional privacy is not just a preference, it is a survival strategy they learned over time. So when you see them share something deeply personal with you, it is never random, and it is never casual. It represents a break in their internal defense system, a moment where trust becomes stronger than fear. Most avoidants grow up learning, consciously or unconsciously, that vulnerability comes with risk. Maybe their emotions were dismissed, misunderstood, or even punished in the past. So instead of expressing what they feel openly, they learn to process things internally. They become self-contained. They rely on logic more than emotional expression. And over time, they build a strong inner wall that keeps their private world protected from outside influence. This is why their emotional world is not easily accessible. On the surface, they may seem calm, independent, even detached. But underneath that surface is a deeply private internal landscape they rarely exposed to others. They can go through stress, confusion, or emotional pain without saying much at all. Not because they don't feel it, but because they have learned to hold it alone. So when they begin to share their private world with you, something significant is happening internally. It is not about the content of what they are sharing alone, it is about the act of sharing itself. When an avoidant starts talking about their fears, their past, their emotional struggles, or their personal thoughts without being forced, they are doing something that does not come naturally to them. They are allowing someone else to enter a space they usually keep locked. This kind of sharing often happens gradually. It may start with small details, something they normally wouldn't mention to others. Then slowly, over time, the depth increases. They might talk about childhood memories, past disappointments, or situations where they felt hurt or misunderstood. These are not just stories. They are emotional openings. Each layer they reveal is a sign that their internal resistance is lowering in your presence. What makes this even more meaningful is that avoidants do not open up easily to many people. They can interact socially, maintain relationships, and still keep their deepest thoughts completely hidden. So when they choose you as someone they can share with, it is not accidental. It is selective. It is intentional in a quiet, subconscious way. You are being placed in a category of emotional safety, even if they cannot explicitly say it. At the same time, this vulnerability does not always come smoothly. It can feel uncomfortable for them. After sharing something personal, they might pull back slightly. They might act more distant afterward, not because they regret what they said, but because they are processing the exposure. For an avoidant, opening up creates emotional intensity they are not used to managing, so they may need space afterward to recalibrate their internal balance. But the key truth remains. They would not share at all if there was no trust. Even if their behavior fluctuates, even if they retreat after opening up, the act of sharing itself is evidence of emotional investment. It shows that their guard is not absolute. It shows that something about the connection has made them feel safe enough, even temporarily, to let someone see beyond the surface. Another important aspect is that avoidants often express feelings indirectly. Instead of saying, "I feel hurt," they might describe a situation that implies it. Instead of saying, "I miss you," they might talk about memories or past moments with a softer tone. Their vulnerability is often layered, subtle, and embedded in stories rather than direct emotional statements. This means you have to pay attention not just to what they say, but how they say it and what they choose to reveal over time. The deeper the trust grows, the more unfiltered their sharing becomes. They may begin to talk without overthinking every word. They may pause less. They may stop editing themselves as heavily. This is a significant shift for someone who is used to controlling emotional exposure. It means your presence is slowly reducing their internal fear of being misunderstood or emotionally overwhelmed. However, it is important to understand that even when they open up, their need for privacy does not disappear. Avoidants do not suddenly become emotionally expressive in a constant way. Instead, they move between openness and withdrawal. But the existence of openness at all is the real signal, because for them, sharing is not a default behavior, it is a choice made against their instinct to remain guarded. So when an avoidant lets you into their private world, even in small fragments, it is one of the strongest indicators of emotional connection they can offer. It means you are not just someone on the outside of their life, you are someone they are slowly allowing inside it, one carefully chosen detail at a time. When it comes to avoidant attachment, love is rarely declared in grand speeches or emotional declarations. It does not usually arrive in overwhelming expressions or constant verbal reassurance. Instead, it shows up in something far quieter, far more subtle, and often far more consistent than people initially notice. Small actions that continue over time, even when emotional intensity is uncomfortable for them. This is where their real pattern of care begins to reveal itself, not in what they say, but in what they repeatedly choose to do. For an avoidant, emotional closeness can feel overwhelming. Too much emotional pressure can trigger their instinct to withdraw. So they naturally lean toward managing relationships in a way that preserves their sense of independence and internal balance. This is why their love, when it is real, often avoids dramatic peaks and instead expresses itself through steady, practical engagement. They may not always say, "I miss you," but they check in. They may not always talk about feelings, but they will show up when it matters. They may not always engage in deep emotional conversations, but they will remain present in ways that are consistent and grounded. This consistency is important because avoidants do not give their energy easily to things that do not matter to them. If something holds no real value, they tend to detach and move on quietly. They conserve emotional energy. They avoid unnecessary emotional investment. So, when they continue to stay in your orbit, when they keep responding, keep engaging, keep offering small forms of connection, it is not random behavior. It is selective investment. These small actions can look ordinary from the outside. A message sent at an unexpected time just to check in. A reply that comes after silence. A small gesture of help when you need it. Remembering something you mentioned in passing and bringing it up later. None of these actions are dramatic on their own, but together, they form a pattern. And that pattern is where the truth becomes visible. Avoidants often express care in ways that feel safe for them. Emotional intensity can feel risky, but practical support feels manageable. So instead of expressing affection directly, they may show it by being useful, present, or attentive in subtle ways. They may not engage in long emotional conversations, but they will make sure you are okay in their own quiet way. They may not talk about attachment, but they will continue to stay connected in ways that fit within their emotional comfort zone. This is why understanding their behavior requires looking beyond words. Someone with an avoidant style might rarely say what they feel, but their actions often reveal more than their silence hides. The challenge is that these actions are easy to overlook if you are expecting traditional expressions of love, because society often teaches that love must be loud, expressive, and emotionally open. The quieter form of consistency can be mistaken for indifference. But with avoidance, consistency carries meaning. If they were truly disengaged, they would not continue small patterns of connection. They would not maintain presence in your life. They would not keep returning in subtle ways. Instead, they would withdraw completely and detach without hesitation. Their emotional system is designed to avoid prolonged discomfort, so if they remain present, even in a limited way, it signals that something about the connection matters enough for them to stay engaged despite their discomfort. There is also something important about effort. For an avoidant, maintaining consistent interaction is not always effortless. At times, it requires internal negotiation. They may feel the urge to withdraw, but still choose to send a message. They may prefer distance, but still respond when you reach out. These small decisions reflect internal conflict between the instinct to protect themselves and the emotional pull of the relationship. Over time, these small, consistent actions build a structure of connection. It may not look intense from the outside, but it is stable in its own way. And stability, for someone who naturally leans toward emotional distance, is not accidental. It is chosen repeatedly through behavior, even if not through words. What makes this even more meaningful is that avoidants rarely maintain consistency for people they are indifferent toward. Their emotional boundaries are clear, even if If something does not matter, it fades quickly from their attention. But if they continue to engage with you in small, repeated ways, it means you occupy a space in their internal world that they have not shut down. So while others may look for love in intensity, an avoidance love often lives in repetition, in the messages that continue, in the check-ins that happen without being asked, in the practical presence that doesn't disappear completely. It is not about grand gestures, it is about the quiet refusal to fully disconnect. And in the world of avoidant attachment, that quiet refusal is often one of the strongest signs that what they feel is not temporary, not superficial, and not easily replaceable. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, emotional distance is often their default mode of self-protection. They are used to creating space when things feel too intense, too close, or too emotionally demanding. So when you notice that they struggle, but still don't fully let go of you, that becomes one of the most revealing signs that what they feel is not superficial or temporary. Because indifference is simple. Indifference is clean. Indifference does not wrestle, does not hesitate, and does not linger. But an avoidant who truly feels something for you does not experience connection in such a clean way. Instead, they experience it as tension. This tension is what creates the push and pull dynamic. On one side, there is their need for emotional safety, guidance, and control. On the other side, there is their emotional attachment to you, which they may not fully understand or know how to manage. So when closeness becomes overwhelming, they pull away. But when distance becomes too quiet, too empty, or too disconnected, something inside them starts to pull them back. This internal conflict is what keeps you in their emotional system, even when they appear distant. What makes this important is that avoidants are not usually people who linger, where there is nothing meaningful. They are not naturally drawn to emotional situations that feel irrelevant or emotionally exhausting without reason. If something truly does not matter to them, they detach in a way that is firm and final. There is no emotional struggle, no repeated return, no silent hesitation. It simply fades. But when they struggle to fully let go of someone, it means the emotional connection is still active, even if it is not expressed openly. This struggle often appears in subtle behaviors. They may disappear for a while, but they do not completely erase you from their life. They may create distance, but they still remain aware of you. They may stop engaging for a period, but they do not always close the door completely. There is often an invisible thread that remains uncut, and that thread is the emotional attachment they have not fully resolved. From the outside, this can look confusing. It may seem inconsistent or uncertain, but internally, it is a reflection, of unresolved emotion. Avoidants do not always process feelings directly. Instead, they compartmentalize them. They separate emotion from behavior. So even when they step back physically or conversationally, the emotional bond does not disappear instantly. It continues to exist in the background, even when they are not actively expressing it. The most important detail here is that letting go completely requires emotional neutrality. And avoidants who still care are rarely emotionally neutral. There is usually some form of internal resistance when they try to detach fully. They might convince themselves to move on, but something interrupts that process. A memory, a feeling, a sense of unfinished emotional business. And this interruption is what brings them back into awareness of the connection again. This is why their distancing is often temporary rather than absolute. They may step away, but they do not always complete the emotional separation. They may try to create space, but that space is often filled with thoughts that prevent full detachment. Even if they are not communicating, the emotional presence of the connection remains active within them. It is also important to understand that avoidants are not always aware of this internal struggle in a fully conscious way. They may simply feel discomfort, restlessness, or emotional confusion without being able to clearly define why. So they respond by creating distance, believing that space will bring clarity. But when clarity does not fully resolve their emotional attachment, the cycle begins again. This is where their behavior becomes meaningful. If someone is truly indifferent, there is no cycle. There is no return, no hesitation, no emotional fluctuation. But with avoidants who still feel connected, there is often movement between closeness and distance, engagement and withdrawal, silence and reappearance. And this movement is not random, it is a reflection of unresolved emotional attachment. The key truth, is this. People let go easily when there is nothing holding them back. But when an avoidant struggles to let go, it means something inside them is still holding on. Even if they cannot fully express it, it may not be loud, it may not be consistent, it may not even be fully understood by them, but it is present enough to prevent complete emotional release. And in relationships, that kind of incomplete letting go is often one of the clearest signs that the connection still has emotional weight, even when it is hidden behind distance. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, emotional discomfort is not just a passing feeling, it is something their entire internal system is designed to avoid. Closeness, vulnerability, and emotional intensity can feel overwhelming, even when the relationship itself matters deeply to them. This is why one of the most powerful signs of genuine connection is not emotional perfection, not smooth communication, and not constant availability. It is effort. It's a real, visible effort made in moments when it would be easier to withdraw. Because the truth is simple. When avoidants do not care, they do not try. There is no internal debate, no emotional friction, no hesitation about pulling away. They disengage cleanly. They step back and do not return to emotional situations that drain them. But when they do care, when there is something real, meaningful, or emotionally significant about the connection, they enter a very different internal experience. They begin to try, even while feeling uncomfortable doing so. This trying is rarely dramatic. It does not always look like emotional breakthroughs or deep confessions. In fact, it often looks very ordinary on the surface. A message sent, even though they are unsure what to say. A reply given after a period of silence. A small effort to explain themselves when they would rather avoid the conversation entirely. Staying present in a discussion that feels emotionally heavy. Choosing to respond instead. Of disappearing completely. These are not grand gestures, but for an avoidant, they are meaningful acts of resistance against their own instinct to withdraw. What makes this effort significant is not the action itself, but what it represents internally. Every time an avoidant tries to stay engaged, despite discomfort, they are managing two opposing forces. One force is their natural emotional defense system, which says, pull back, create space, reduce intensity, stay safe. The other force is their attachment to you, which says, stay, respond, maintain connection, don't fully disconnect. Trying becomes the moment where connection temporarily outweighs avoidance, and that balance is not easy for them to maintain. It requires energy. It requires internal negotiation. It requires them to sit in emotional discomfort long enough to act against their instinct. That is why their effort is often inconsistent. It is not because their feelings are inconsistent, but because their capacity to tolerate emotional intensity fluctuates. Some days they can engage, other days they retreat. But the important detail is that they return to trying again. This pattern becomes especially meaningful because avoidants do not naturally invest effort into emotional spaces that feel meaningless to them. If a connection has no emotional value, they simply disengage and move on. There is no internal struggle worth noting. But when they continue trying, especially after moments of distance or time withdrawal, it suggests that the emotional connection is still active within them, even if they cannot express it smoothly. It is also important to understand that their effort often happens quietly. Avoidants are not always expressive in their attempts. They may not announce their feelings or explain their internal struggle. Instead, their effort appears in behavior, in consistency that returns after silence, in communication that resumes even after hesitation, in participation that continues. Even when emotional discomfort is present, it is subtle, but it is deliberate. Sometimes, their effort may even seem awkward or imperfect. They might not say things the right way. They might struggle to express emotions clearly. They might overthink their responses or keep things brief to manage emotional exposure. But even this imperfect communication is still effort. Because for someone who naturally avoids emotional intensity, engaging at all is already a step outside their comfort zone. There is also a deeper layer to this behavior. When avoidants try despite discomfort, they are often testing emotional safety. They are asking without words, can I stay here without losing myself? Or can I engage without feeling overwhelmed? Each attempt becomes a small experiment in emotional tolerance. If the experience feels manageable, they may stay engaged longer. If it feels too intense, they may retreat again. But the fact that they continue returning to try again shows that the connection is still something they are willing to explore, even cautiously. This is where the real meaning of their effort becomes visible. Love for an avoidant is not always about ease. It is about navigating discomfort in small, repeated steps. It is about choosing engagement when withdrawal would feel simpler. It is about staying present even when emotional intensity creates internal tension. And most importantly, it is about continuing to try even after moments of pulling away. Because if there was no emotional attachment, there would be no reason to struggle at all, no reason to re-engage, no reason to push through discomfort. The absence of trying would be immediate and final. But when trying continues even in fragmented, inconsistent, or imperfect ways, it reveals that something deeper is still holding their attention. So their effort, however small it may seem, becomes one of the clearest indicators of genuine emotional investment. Not because it is perfect, but because it exists at all in a space where their instinct would normally be to avoid it entirely. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, emotional exposure is never something that happens lightly. They do not naturally move toward vulnerability. They move away from it. They are more comfortable observing life from a safe emotional distance than placing themselves in situations where they might feel exposed, dependent, or emotionally seen in a deep way. That is why one of the strongest and most meaningful signs of genuine emotional connection is when they allow someone to see their imperfect self. Because what most people do not realize is that avoidants are not emotionless. They feel deeply, but they have learned to contain those feelings, manage them privately, and present a controlled version of themselves to the world. On the surface, they may appear composed, self-sufficient, and emotionally steady, but internally, they carry fears, insecurities, unresolved experiences, and emotional complexity that they rarely reveal to others. Their inner world is often much more sensitive than their outer behavior suggests. This is why allowing someone to see that inner world is not accidental. It is not casual. It is not something they do with everyone. It requires a level of trust that breaks through their usual emotional defenses. When an avoidant lets you witness their flaws, their doubts, their emotional inconsistencies, or their moments of weakness, they are stepping outside their protective structure. And that step is significant because their default setting is to hide, not reveal. Imperfect self-disclosure can take many forms. It might be admitting that they struggle with emotions they cannot easily explain. It might be showing frustration, confusion, or vulnerability in a situation where they normally would have withdrawn. It might be letting you see their limitations instead of maintaining a composed exterior, or it might be sharing thoughts they usually keep to themselves because they fear being misunderstood or judged. Each of these moments reflects something deeper than communication. It reflects trust. For avoidance, trust is not built through words alone. It is built through emotional safety. They need to feel that exposing parts of themselves will not lead to pressure, rejection, or overwhelming emotional demands. So when they begin to reveal imperfections, it often means they have experienced a sense of safety with you that overrides their usual instinct to hide. Even if it is temporary, even if it is partial, it still matters. What makes this even more meaningful is that avoidants are highly self-protective of their image. They often prefer to be seen as capable, independent, and emotionally stable. This is not necessarily because they are pretending it. It's because they value control over how they are perceived. Vulnerability disrupts that control. It introduces uncertainty. It opens space for emotional unpredictability. So when they willingly step into that space with someone, it is not because they are comfortable, it is because the connection feels safe enough to risk discomfort. Another important aspect is that their vulnerability is usually selective. They do not open up to everyone, and even when they do open up, it is often in layers. They may reveal something small first, then gradually allow deeper insight over time. This gradual exposure is their way of testing emotional safety. They observe how you respond. They watch whether their vulnerability is respected, misunderstood, or used against them. If the response feels safe, they may continue opening up. If it feels overwhelming or unsafe, they retreat again. But when they consistently allow you to see beyond their controlled exterior, it indicates something important. You are no longer just an external presence in their life. You are becoming part of their internal emotional landscape. And that transition is not something they give freely or quickly. It is also worth understanding that when avoidants show their imperfect self, it does not mean they suddenly become emotionally expressive in a conventional way. They do not lose their need for space or their tendency to withdraw. Instead, what changes is access. You gain access to parts of them that others do not see. You are included in moments of honesty that are usually kept hidden, and that inclusion is deeply meaningful in their internal world, even if they do, not express it openly. Sometimes after showing vulnerability, they may even retreat slightly. This is not rejection, it is processing. Exposure can feel intense for them, even when it is voluntary. So they may step back to regain emotional equilibrium. But the fact that they opened up in the first place remains significant. It cannot be undone. It becomes part of the emotional history of the relationship. The most important truth here is that people do not show their imperfect selves to those they do not trust. And for avoidants who are naturally guarded, that threshold is even higher. So when they allow you to see their flaws, their emotional struggles, and their unfiltered self, it is one of the clearest indicators that the connection has moved beyond surface-level interaction. It means you are not just interacting with the version of them they present to the world, you are being trusted with the version they usually protect. And in the emotional world of an avoidant, that kind of trust is one of the deepest forms of connection they are capable of offering.